All right, welcome to part two. So we left off on this document here. So we are looking at, did William Shakespeare exist? And what happened is, oopsies, I'm going too far here. So he is actually one of the most widely recognized authors, poets, and playwrights that the world has ever seen. Like, he is very famous. And yet we want to know is, did he exist as the William Shakespeare that we call him? Was that who he actually was? Because the thing is that the only account we have of any kind of William Shakespeare was a commoner. And so a lot of the works of William Shakespeare, and you will investigate more of William Shakespeare's works as you go through your high school journey. And so he tends to have the perspective of someone who was more of an aristocrat, so someone who was wealthy, someone who was a nobleman, compared to someone who was just a commoner. So is it possible that someone who never was invited into that world of the aristocracy, I don't think I pronounced that right, the nobility, how about that? Then is it possible that someone who was a commoner could actually dazzle the royal court the way that he did? So we're going to take a look at that. What you're going to do is you have a few pages that you're going to be reading, and you have questions to answer at the end of them. So some of them you have to have it where it's just simply answering questions about the main idea of what you read. Other times it's asking for your opinion. Please keep in mind, anytime it's asking for your opinion, you need to back it up with proof. So back it up with proof from what you just read. So first question here. Oh dear, I keep going too far ahead. So this one here is talking about William Shakespeare and having it where they start looking at some historical documents, who he was, and they're having it where what, first and foremost, the Shakespeare or Shakespeare, whatever, that they find in historical documents, it sounds like that person was a commoner. And so that's not necessarily a huge red flag, but then the thing is that almost all of Shakespeare's works showed quite the extensive knowledge around royal court, aristocratic life, philosophy, and law. And so that sounds like someone who knew what they were talking about and not just a commoner who wouldn't have had as much access to that world. So you're going to read about this because apparently the Shakespeare that existed back then, he probably didn't have the highest education because his father did not know how to read or write, and his own daughter on her marriage certificate, she could only write an X because that means that she did not know how to read or write herself. So then is it true that someone who wrote some of the world's most famous playwrights and poems and all of that, is it really possible that someone who wrote these great works would have it where he came from someone who did not know how to read or write, his own father didn't know, and then have it where his daughter was never taught? Like, to me, that is definitely curious that she couldn't even sign her name. She could only sign an X. And then also, we're going to take a look at how with Shakespeare, whenever he signed a document, they actually were almost illegible. That means you couldn't read it, or it was very hard to read. And then they all looked different. So makes you wonder as far as how legitimate this man, who is the only record we have of a William Shakespeare around that time, is it really possible that he could have written such amazing, famous works? So you're going to read all of this, and then you're going to have it where you tell me, what do you think? Is it possible that this William Shakespeare that they have an account of, is it possible that he might not have created these high quality works that are associated with his name? Is it possible that he did not write them? And can you have it where you say either yes or no, and then you need to give me proof from what you just read that you would use to justify what you're saying. And then on this page here, you're going to take a look at the different signatures that we have on record of William Shakespeare. And this on the side here, it just tells you where you would see the signature. And then down here, you're going to have it where just explore it. You're going to be a detective. This is like a CSI investigation. So you have to get your little, magnifying glass out, and you're going to answer these questions. So you're going to take a look at these signatures and you're going to see, okay, are there any ways that they're similar? I'm not talking about identical. I'm saying similar. Things that you see that are pretty close to each other that could prove that maybe it's the same person. And I'm seeing some S's that look fairly similar. I'm not saying they're exact, but I see a similar style. And so, write down some ideas for how there might be similar, but then tell me also, how are they different? Are there other letters that you notice, or the spacing that is different in all the different signatures? And then you tell me in this one here, what's your conclusion? What's your opinion about what you're thinking, just based on this evidence, just based on this? What do you think about Shakespeare? Same man or different? Then what we're going to do is taking a look at this one. This is just a page that is going to have it where it gives you information about 3 other men that might have been William Shakespeare, that maybe William Shakespeare was just a pseudonym. And what that means, it's a fictitious name, so it's made up, and it's one that is used by an author typically. So a pseudonym, it's a fake name that an author will use sometimes when they are publishing their works. And so if that's the case, then what they've done is they've basically done a case study for you, and they've brought up 3 men that they think are the most likely options. If William Shakespeare did not exist, they think that these 3 men are the most likely candidates. So you're going to read about them, and you're going to read why they think that these men could have been William Shakespeare. And then over here, you're just going to answer some questions. Then you're going to have it where you tell me what is a pseudonym and how does it apply in this case. They even have the definition up there. And then you're going to tell me, well, a pseudonym, you can tell me what a pseudonym is, and then you're going to say, well, how does it apply in this case? Well, maybe one of these men used the synonym of William Shakespeare, and that they had reasons, and you're going to maybe share those reasons there. And then down here, what's the argument that Sir Francis Bacon was the real author? And then tell me about Christopher Marlowe. So you're going to basically have it where you tell me just like a couple points why you think, based on what you read, why these men might have been the real author and not this William Shakespeare man that we have record of. And then tell me your opinion here. So you might have a different answer than someone else in the class. You might even have a different answer than me. But of those 3 men, after what you've read about them, what would you say is the most likely of those 3 to be Shakespeare? If that's the case, if one of them were to be Shakespeare, who do you think it is? Basically, like who done it type idea. And then why? Don't forget to give me your proof. Give me your evidence for why you think that. Okay, and then down here, you have it where you have another section that has it where you're like, well, did William Shakespeare even exist at all? So now we're getting into more evidence for maybe why there is no actual William Shakespeare. And so you're going to read it, and then you're going to tell me, is it possible that this William Shakespeare, the guy that they have on record, is it possible that he's William Shakespeare? And then tell me why or why not. Give me proof from the text. And then we had this part here where they're talking about, well, hey, if he's such a great writer, which he was treated as a great writer at that time. So then if that's the case, when he dies, you would think, like kind of like the idea of a celebrity nowadays. If someone dies who's famous, people know about it. And yet you're going to read this and be like, well, there wasn't really any mention made of the death of William Shakespeare. So what does that tell you? Does that tell you that there was an actual William Shakespeare that lived? Or is it possible that maybe the name William Shakespeare was simply a pseudonym for one of those other men? And that's why we don't hear mention of William Shakespeare's death. We don't hear, like, it wasn't a widespread thing. So you're going to read this, you're going to tell me your reaction to it. Just tell me your gut instinct. And I don't want you saying, I don't care, I don't know. That's not a valid answer. I need you to tell me what your thoughts are as far as, do you think that the fact that William Shakespeare's death was not something that was highly publicized, do you think that that is an important detail in the case that maybe William Shakespeare did not even exist in the first place. And then what you're going to do is say that, okay, well, let's say there is a man, William Shakespeare, he did write those 39 plays, and let's say his death just really wasn't spoken about. There wasn't really much information out there about his death. If that's the case, so let's say this is an actual man, he's a celebrity, he's not using a pseudonym, he's legit, and he dies, and there's no real public mention of it. I want you to maybe see if you can explain that then, all right? So I want you to kind of be the devil's advocate and tell me why that might have been the case. And the last page here, we have it where you can take a look at some other authors, and it's pretty cool. We have quotes from Charles Dickens, from Mark Twain, Charlie Chaplin. We have a few different people who are weighing in on the whole theory of Shakespeare, if he actually existed or not. So you're going to read those quotes, and then what you'll do is have it where, just tell me, and again, you might have different opinions than someone else, which person seems to doubt the most that Shakespeare was actually real, and explain your answer. And then which person seems to believe the most that Shakespeare was real. Again, explain your answer. Okay, I'm hoping that makes sense. You are welcome to email me if you have any questions at all. If it's not making sense, you don't know what to do, just let me know. You can also pop in during office hours. You have until Monday. I'm hoping that you can let me know if it ends up being too much work. I just figured that you have a little more time to work on it. We'll see. Hopefully that's going to be okay. All right, so, and don't forget, if you're emailing me, cpeach@heritagechristian.ca, not crystal.peach. A lot of you are having it where it autofills, and unfortunately, when it autofills, that means that a lot of times it's autofilling with crystal.peach, and that means I either sometimes don't get it or I can't open the document, and that's been hard for some students who have not had their work go through. So please double check, like type the address out completely. Hopefully that'll get to me then. All right. Okay, see ya.